There's a discussion about rebellion in architecture. Rebellion, change, revolution, movement forward. I think those are topics that are much discussed at SCI-Arc, and you can see that in the work which surrounds you in the building today. And one of the primary ingredients, I would say, of someone who is at heart rebellious or looks for new ways to think and to see and to understand is the capacity to consider the possibility that he's entirely incorrect. So what he's an advocate of, what he's interested in, he pursues passionately, argues for aggressively, but understands somewhere that it could be other than what he says it is. So the world could be other than what he proclaims. Jeff Kipnis is our speaker today. Many of you know him as a critic and an architect from various places around the world. I think he may be the exception that proves the rule, because if we're interested in the prospect that someone could both be an advocate and countenance the prospect that the advocacy is erroneous and it could be other than what it is, Jeff Kipnis probably doesn't countenance that prospect. In other words, he is what he is, he does what he does, he says what he says, and it can't be any other way. Please welcome Professor Kipnis.
Sponsored by Coca-Cola. Thanks, Eric. And that's exactly right. It says here, good morning. I guess I missed that. And I want you to know I'm incredibly nervous. I lecture all over the world. I simply extemporize. I have never written. It's been 20 years between I show up with paper at all. I've written this thing down. I've got my glasses. I'm scared to death. So, and it's because it is such a deep and important honor for me to be here. I really love this school. I visited it for the first time 30 years ago. I fell in love with it then. I've stayed in love with it through all of its transformations. I have my own home institution, Ohio State University. Which is actually better, but I love it dearly. It's really my family, and I'm super proud of it. But there's something about this place that's just, I don't know, I can't get it out of my blood. And so to actually be here, to be involved, to work in some way as a teacher, and now to be asked to do this is really important to me. Normally, who's speaking to you in this case is a world-class architecture, Pritzker Prize winner like Thom Mayne, or super influential architect like Wolf Prix, or a well-known or important theorist or critic like Michael Sorkin. I'm here as SCI-Arc's biggest fan. So that's fantastic. I'm like those guys that paint themselves in the school colors enough times that they finally get free tickets or something like that. Now, what's also unusual about me is I have talked to every one of these graduating students personally hundreds of times. I mean, just over and over and over. So that's not typical for a commencement speaker. They know me. They know everything I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything new. I invite them to tweet and like me on Facebook during the entire talk. Actually, I've decided to speak to the parents. And the name of this talk is therefore, was the tuition worth it? And I say that because I feel like here's what happens. You see what your kid is doing, comes home, you ask him about it, and it's weird. And you think, well, maybe he's just one of the, he's a weird kid. Then you walk in that building, and you see that the whole damn place is insane. And then you have this, like, you're traumatized. Like, what is this? And I'm going to try to help explain it a little bit. Now, last year, Thom Mayne gave a I thought, the most moving commencement address I'd ever heard. It was just fantastic. And what he was dealing, and I think it's important to remember the context. It was a year ago. It was in the middle of the Gulf oil spill, one of the most horrifying events of my life. It was barely 7 months after the tsunami and nuclear incident and earthquake in Japan. It was 2 years after the global financial crisis. So it was a really different, he was speaking in the context of a really difficult period of the world and trying to understand how what we do is going to relate to that. And it was a fantastic talk, I thought. And the way he did this is he had just read something in the New York Times, and he had compared, the New Yorker had, by coincidence, profiled two people in the same issue. One was Michelle Bachmann, who, you know, is the Christian conservative, was at one time an important candidate for the Republican nomination. And another one was a scientist named Svante Pablo, who you wouldn't know. But and the profiles were how they coped with traumatic childhoods. And what Michelle Bachmann has done is sought out in her life, whether you agree with it or not is up to you, a need for some sense of absolute truth, and that would stabilize her life and the life of others. So it's not just conservative, it's ultra-conservative. And the article actually makes it quite personal, and you feel differently about her. So, for example, she rejects everything you can imagine, evolution, Big Bang, you know, everything. But in the name of stability, and in the name of a certainty that there is a higher truth that we can all absolutely rely on, have faith in. Svante Pablo was a nutty scientist who kept going against the grain for everything. He grew up also in a difficult situation, but he reacted by cultivating courage, curiosity, a willing to be humiliated in public, to stand up and say to his colleagues stuff that nobody in the world thought was possible. For example, that Neanderthals mated with modern humans, which he's since proven. And Thom's point was that this is a place where we teach courage and curiosity, that we're not afraid of not knowing what we're doing, and that is the way SCI-Arc is organized, and that is the ethos of this school. And I was deeply moved by that, because he went on to connect that to the diversity and experimentation you see, and what he kept calling an aggressive engagement with the real. And this is exactly what Eric spoke to. Ben, will you quit waving? Just 1 minute, okay? Now I lost my place. I got to put my glasses back on. Hang on a second. Oh, yeah. And I thought it was, I still thought it was good. You can watch it online. It really touched me. But as I thought more and more and more about it, it occurred to me that he alighted over something that is true, but it changes the tone of his talk a little bit. Because when it comes to architecture, every one of you, everyone we meet, everyone we know is a Michelle Bachmann. They want it to be familiar, comfortable. They basically want the absolute stability of a recognizable, comfortable, familiar domestic or work environment. And why not? Why shouldn't they be entitled to comfort, convenience, pride, pleasure, and familiarity? So it wasn't quite the same as he conflated it, you know. And so I thought my job today was to explain to you why this school and we and many of us in architecture seek to look at those issues and think about why we might better do something better by doing something not so expected, not so connected to our traditions. And the reason for that is the power of architecture is as much social and psychological as it is and cultural as it is physical or aesthetic or architectural. Filmmakers have known this for a long time. Do you know the movie The Shining? If you know the movie The Shining, if you just watch the movie closely, it's actually a story about everything is okay as long as each character stays in the right place. So as long as Jack is in the big room and Shelley Duvall is in the domestic spaces and what was his name? David, or what was it? Danny stayed in the interstitial spaces, everything is fine. It's only when Jack goes into the bedroom and everything gets scary, or Shelley comes into the main room and you see all work and no playback. So things go wrong where people are in spaces they don't belong. And if you remember correctly, Danny is able to save himself because he lives in the world of interstitial spaces. And so when Jack is trying to kill him with the axe and he's running in and he jumps into that cabinet to save himself, he sees a room and Jack sees a door, a wall, something he can't through. And when they get to the hedge mage, Jack sees a wall of hedges that can't be moved through, and Danny sees a door. And so there is a way that architecture is constantly organizing us in ways that are much deeper, more profound than what one would assume to be the job of a building. This will relate, I think, to the fact that the 20th century, in both intellectual circles and in art circles, is the century of the pursuit of the power of the counterintuitive. Counterintuitive simply means, relativity, quantum mechanics, atonal art, throwing paint at the canvas, those incredible French films where absolutely nothing happens for 2 hours. It costs $9, So it turns out every discipline has figured out how to use the counterintuitive to be more powerful, to do things that no one ever expected to be possible because they didn't think the way you could do it even existed. And in a certain sense, this school is about the counterintuitive. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Notice that you're in the shade. And notice there's a sunshade there. And then notice that the sun is over there. Now, it would be counterintuitive, I think, if I was putting that shade up. But we know that actually we want the light of God to rain on our faculty, so your tuition feels like it's worth it. Actually, research in counterintuitive effects in architecture is long-lived. Some of them are famous. One of the most famous ones was Maurice Lapidus's staircase at the Fontainebleau Hotel, where he put the coat room at the top of the staircase. And everybody didn't want it. The clients absolutely refused to do it. He refused to do the project unless they do it. There was a big scandal about it. And he knew that the effect he was going to produce would work, because he knew that when women would walk in, they would go up that staircase in their fur coats or whatever, take the coat off, and then come down the staircase like Gloria Swanson. And it produced 2 years of weekend ceremony, the ceremony of coming down the staircase at the Fontainebleau. It's still famous. You can still see articles about it online. In a more serious note, Hans Scharoun, who was a major architect at the turn of the century, right after World War II, and was the chief planner of Berlin, he had the job of building a concert hall in Berlin as the first building to be built after the war. Now, this is a difficult situation because music had played such an important role in the Nazi propaganda experience as a kind of martial unifying element. And so how was he going to do that? How was he going to make a place for music in that context? And what he did was invented a seating pattern, absolutely new seating pattern. See, you were all seated as if you were one unity, a kind of fascia. So this seating makes you one thing. In his seating pattern, which is 4 stories tall, it has 16, basically they look like broken eggshells. So nobody can sit in a big group, and nobody can see themselves. They're all at different levels. Nobody can see themselves as part of a big group. They're smaller organic groups that disenfranchise, what's the word? Nah, shut up. I don't need to think words for me. Undid. The power, the psychological power, what it was to sit there and to hear music. And it was a really fantastic experiment. And it goes on and on and on. Eisenman's lack of a front door at the Wexner Center, so that the ceremony of entering a museum and as a thing that guarantees the art you're about to see is undone. Artists don't want that. Artists don't want the effect of the Louvre when you walk in. All of you think the Winged Victory of Samothrace is great, because how could it not be great? It's on top of that gigantic staircase where Napoleon was supposed to stand. So you walk in, that must be the most important sculpture in the world. You know, it turns out it's a good sculpture, but you can't see it right on that staircase. It's a Greek sculpture, supposed to be seen at a 45-degree oblique. It's presented as a Roman piece at a 90-degree oblique, which means you love it, but you will never get to see it, which is the kind of thing I love about architecture. Is I like when we win our things. Gehry's concert hall at downtown. When you go see it, it looks odd. It looks completely unconnected to anything. And actually, every one of you, particularly if you're from out of town, you should ask your son and daughter to take you down there and show you what I'm about to tell you. You'll find it quite moving. It's a building that looks utterly unlike any other buildings around it, except if you pay attention to it, it starts to gather the curvature of the rose. Is it called a rose? The round thing across the street. Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, thank you. My student. There's a test. And then you look in the background, you'll see the towers of downtown. And this building is not a piece of sculpture. It's this magical thing pulling all this stuff together, and it really is quite moving. And so I invite you to give your student, your son or daughter a test, and ask them to go explain it to you. So to explore these possibilities in architecture, and then to learn to convey those. The value of these explorations to others is the reason for being of SCI-Arc. That's what we do. As it's true for most research, most of the efforts that we do don't work. They fail for one reason or another. Too expensive, can't be built, simply just don't work as they hoped. But over time and after a whole lot of trial and error, they can and do amazing things. And in a world that will need it with increasing urgency, I think, architecture is more like the soundtrack in a movie than it is a piece of furniture you sit on. When you're in a movie, it's telling you to feel happy, sad, it's telling you to cry. The music is controlling you in a way you never know. But the difference between architecture and a movie, and a soundtrack in a movie, is it never turns off. That you are in this soundtrack every day of your life, and it is helping you or telling you how to feel and what to do. And to produce a body of students that is acutely aware of this and that knows when it's a good idea to use that power and knows when it's a good idea not to use that power, or at least try not to use that power, that seems to me a really important experiment. So I think, therefore, SCI-Arc is a kind of Mission Impossible Academy. I love movies, obviously. I don't like to read. I don't like to study. I don't like to actually do any work, but I go to movies and I come talk at places. So it's not the model for every architecture school or even the most architecture school, but it is a crucial, irreducible, and invaluable part of the discourse of architecture as a fundamental agent in our lives. Actually, I was thinking about this when the Mission Impossible. The scene I love best in all the Mission Impossible movies is in Mission Impossible 2. Anthony Hopkins is playing the captain, Ethan Hunt, who's the Tom Cruise character, his boss. And he's just given him a difficult assignment. And Tom Cruise says, well, it's going to be difficult to get into this building. And Anthony Hopkins, in his incredible way, says, this is mission impossible for us, not mission difficult for us. Difficulty is a walk in a park for you, should be a walk in a park for you. It's an incredible line. And I thought, I've always loved that line. And so when I hear about the difficult world that we face in the near future, I actually give pause, like all of you, with concern and fear. But then I remember these SCI-Arc students and how, and to a person, absolutely to a person, they have just nailed their thesis research. Not in the sense that every one of them, or even any one of them, has produced a proven result, but in the sense that each of these candidates has independently researched a particular problem. They were not students during their thesis. They got guidance and consultation like every one of us does in our lives. But they did the work on their own. They researched the background of the work. They learned the skills and, in fact, developed the techniques to address and explore the possibilities. And these are often, in fact, more often than not, counterintuitive approaches to the solutions. And then they gained the confidence and poise to discuss the merits and limitations of the work frankly and honestly with any audience, whether expert in the field or a lay person. And I can guarantee you one thing to be true. If not one has reached the point of a proven conclusion, each and every project in that building has one device, one thought, one technique, or at least one well-formed ambition that until now, until this work, has not even occurred to our discipline as a possibility. That's a fantastic achievement. It may or may not pan out, but as an achievement, it means they are no longer students. They are colleagues. And it makes me know that to the extent that architecture will and must play a major role as we face these formidable challenges I've been speaking of, difficulty will be, for these graduates, a walk in the park. Thank you.